So hello again, and on behalf of the Arlington Democratic Town Committee, my name is Stephanie Swanson, and I'm the co-chair of the committee, along with my stalwart partner, Amy Coolidge, who I could not do any of this without. We work to build and strengthen the Democratic Party in Massachusetts and in Arlington, and we work to organize and work for the election and appointment of members of the Democratic Party at the district, state, and national level. All of these aims are in part what brings us here tonight. So we at the Arlington Dems meet monthly, virtually for the time being, and everyone is welcome. Our next meeting is June 7th at 7 p.m., so please feel free to join us. More info can be found on our website, which is on the slide that you see now, and please don't hesitate to contact us with questions or comments. Tonight is part 2 of our Strengthening Democracy series, and we will focus on the Commonwealth state of democracy with a particular focus on the 2022 gubernatorial election. We'll explore why it's historically been so hard to elect a Democratic governor, last month's panelist, Governor Patrick notwithstanding, and what it'll take to win next year. Last month, our first forum looked at the national state of democracy, and we heard from Governor Patrick, we heard from Tony Mass from the Movement Voter Project, and we heard from Herb Meisner, a national campaigner with Common Cause. And Steve Allman served as our incredible moderator. June 17th, our third and final forum in this series will zero in on local party politics and political organizing. So now I have the privilege to introduce an individual who we are all lucky to call our Congresswoman, Assistant Speaker Katherine Clark. Congresswoman Clark is nothing less than a force for change, a determined legislator, and a staunch advocate for her constituents in Massachusetts' 5th Congressional District, and for individuals across the country. She's so effective, in fact, that her colleagues elected her as Assistant Speaker, making her an important member of majority leadership, the second highest ranking woman in leadership, and Massachusetts' highest ever ranking woman in the House. Katherine fights for high quality, affordable childcare, paid family leave, safer schools, and expanded educational access for vulnerable students, access to healthcare for women, and ending wage discrimination. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. She also works tirelessly to elect and support the election of Democrats with shared values across the country. I absolutely am honored and privileged to introduce our Congresswoman, Assistant Speaker Katherine Clark.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephanie. It is so great to be here with all of you this evening, even virtually. Special thanks to the Arlington Democratic Town Committee for inviting me to be part of this incredible Strengthening Our Democracy series. And thank you to the Watertown Democratic Town Committee for co-hosting. And I am honored to be here tonight with your incredible panelists, Winelia Rivera, Leslie Braxton Campbell, and Crystal Haynes. We have such tremendous advocates here in the 5th District, and I love when we can come together to have these important conversations. And this is what we mean. When we talk about strengthening our democracy and ensuring democratic victories here at home and across the country, as this series lays out, we have to understand the challenges in front of us in order to build a successful strategy and seize the many opportunities ahead. But we are seeing so many obstacles cropping up to block our path to a more equitable future. From voter suppression bills being offered in 48 states, being pushed through those state legislatures, to anti-abortion movement, to the continued spread of racist and anti-Semitic attacks in communities across the country. It is critically important that we recognize that Massachusetts is not immune to any of these dangerous forces. These are not red state problems or blue state problems. These are United States problems, and we each have a role in the fight to protect and strengthen our democracy. We know well, and those of you on this call know very well, Democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires constant vigilance and renewed commitment to fighting for our shared beliefs. As President Obama stated, the truths that all people are created equal are self-evident, but they are not self-executing. So from our local select boards and city councils to the state legislature and gubernatorial election, to the midterms in Congress, we have to come together now to be ready in 2022 to support our communities and our very democracy by electing Democrats up and down the ticket. And it starts with conversations like this one tonight. When we think about a winning strategy for a Democratic ticket in Massachusetts, we must recognize that it ultimately comes down to us. We must build the infrastructure early to support our nominees. In our individual communities, we have to work to ensure every eligible voter has the right to make their voice heard, and that our communication meets people where they are, sharing information that is timely and accurate, and making sure people hear about candidates who represent the issues they care about in their communities. I know that we can do this because we've done it before. Together, we faced what seemed like insurmountable obstacles in both 2018 and 2020, with a hateful, corrupt president who would stop at nothing to retain power, and a global pandemic threatening our ability to campaign and cast our ballots. But we got organized, we got creative, and we won. And it was you, the people on this call, the organizers and activists willing to talk about issues with your friends and neighbors, that carried us through and showed us the opportunity in front of us. We have seen the power of organizing time and time again. From Georgia to Texas to Capitol Hill to Beacon Hill, our collective action speaks volumes. And as we look now at the national story and what we are seeing play out, especially when it comes to making sure that we are preserving that fundamental right to vote, it can seem a little overwhelming. Can we really get past what these different states are trying to enact? Are we going to be able to break through the filibuster in the Senate and get the protections that we need? How are we going to be able to answer this moment? And I think so much about when the ACA was threatened, when the Republicans held the majority in the House and they tried to remove healthcare coverage for millions of people. And I could literally walk through the halls of the Capitol Hill office building and hear the phones ringing in the offices. And for each phone call, there was an email or a text going out. And the American people made it clear that they would not stand for this. And that's what each of us has to do in our own personal realm. As we move forward, we have to stay engaged, have to have the tough conversations, listen to those in your community that need to be heard and uplift their voices. I hope that you will consider me a partner in our shared fight to strengthen our democracy. I look forward to continuing this work together, to making sure that the ideals we talk about of liberty and equality and justice for all truly become a reality for all. I look forward to the ideas that we are going to discuss and then put into action. And I thank you all from the bottom of my heart into not letting things be self-executing, but for being here for tonight and for all the work you have done to ensure that those ideals do become reality, and that from our local communities all the way across this country, we can use equity as our through line and together meet this moment that calls out for racial, economic, and climate justice. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for having me tonight, and I'll turn it back over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Speaker, for those extremely important and inspiring words. They remind us that the work we do tonight and beyond are crucial at a time when there are powerful forces intent on undermining our democratic institutions and impinging on our rights to vote, to gather, to protest. Many of the issues mentioned in our forum discussion last month and present in the work of our federal elected officials, like the Madam Assistant Speaker, are going to be heard and talked about today. They can be seen here on the state level. We're grappling with a climate crisis, we're recovering from a crippling pandemic, and we're fighting to protect our voting rights, all while racial justice and equality sit at the forefront of our minds. We here at the Arlington Democratic Town Committee and our partners and co-sponsors are committed to collaboration and action when it comes to confronting these injustices and pursuing equity and equality for all. One of the ways we do that, as Assistant Speaker Clark mentioned, is through our democracy and through action, which brings us here tonight. So as a quick plug, I want to once again mention our third and final forum on June 17th. It'll happen at 7:30, not 7 o'clock like our first two. And it'll discuss engagement in local party politics and political organizing at the local level. Featured speakers will include our keynote, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, the first woman of color to be elected to Congress from Massachusetts, and our panelists, Zane Crute, president of the Mystic Valley area branch of the NAACP, Helena Burbano, political consultant and organizer, as well as co-chair of the Mass Democratic Party's AAPI caucus, and Gurley Adrian, the first Black woman to be elected to the Everett City Council. So thank you, as you guys came in, for agreeing to our guidelines. You said accept to our code of conduct, and I just want to remind everyone that we are recording this forum and we will be sharing it and posting it afterward. Finally, before we begin, I want to recognize any elected officials who have been a part of this and helped us along the way. And namely, I want to say thank you to, I believe, Rep. Steve Owens from Watertown is here. So thank you, Rep, for being here with us tonight. I also want to thank our co-sponsors. We have our next slide has a list of all our allies, town and city democratic committees, organizations, activists. There are really too many to name, but take a look at the slide that Mona put together for us, and it has a long list of supporters and organizations we call friends. So it's been an added bonus in the world of virtual events to be able to work with so many people. I also want to say a huge thank you and really recognize all of the volunteers on our next slide. These are Arlington Democratic Town Committee members who have dedicated countless, and I mean it when I say countless hours, to make this forum a reality. In the interest of time, I'm not going to name everyone, but you can take a look here at the long list of names of individuals that were involved in the planning of this event. And we're all in total and active and very engaged group. But we do want to have many others join us in our efforts as well. You're always welcome to join our crew and help advance the democratic values and issues that we work so hard to push. So if you haven't already, and if you haven't caught on to the theme, please join us in our work. On the next slide, we're going to head over to the main event. We're here tonight for the state level discussion of our Strengthening Democracy series. We're so lucky to have as our moderator and host tonight, Crystal Haynes, and our two panelists, Wilnelia Rivera, who has a whole host of titles and accolades you'll hear about in a minute. But most important to me is her role as a fellow Tufts University grad, so go Jumbos, and Leslie Braxton Campbell. You'll hear more about each of them in just a minute. All of our speakers tonight are going to help us answer the question, why is it important for us to elect a Democratic governor of Massachusetts? And what prevents Democrats from consistently electing a Democrat to the State House corner office? So now I'm going to introduce Josie Almond, who is a student activist here in Arlington and fellow organizer of this event tonight. And she's going to introduce our speakers. Josie, please take it away.
Hi, everybody. So we are so pleased to have Wilnelia Rivera on our panel this evening. Ms. Rivera was recently named one of the 100 most influential Bostonians. She's a political strategist, urban planner, and project manager. She led Ayanna Pressley's successful congressional campaign. Ms. Rivera leads a movement-building organization called Rivera Consulting that is committed to planting the seeds for deeper democracy, collective care, and just sustainability. Our second speaker is Leslie Braxton Campbell. Leslie Campbell is a native of Springfield, Massachusetts, where he's a teacher in Springfield Public Schools. Leslie began doing advocacy work in high school and continued through college and into his adult life. He is passionate about politics and community change. Leslie currently participates in several local, state, and national Democratic Party organizations. He currently serves as the president of the Young Democrats of Massachusetts. And our moderator this evening is Crystal Haynes. Ms. Haynes is a 5-time Emmy-nominated journalist at Boston 25 News. She is the events working group lead on the Human Rights Commission. She's a member of the National Association of Black Journalists and the NAACP, and she holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in broadcast journalism from Emerson College and a master's in media advocacy from Northeastern. She grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts, but she now lives in Arlington. And those are really impressive, so take it away.
Thanks, Josie. That was flawless, much appreciated, and probably way better than I could have done. So just as a quick FYI, we've invited our speakers to make some initial remarks, and we'll have a moderated and wide-ranging discussion followed by a Q&A that is fueled by audience participation. So please don't be shy about using the chat function. We will be collating all of the questions that come in, and we'll be sending them over to Crystal, but Crystal will be our MC for the night. So I'm going to turn it over to Crystal and say an initial thank you, and here we go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and moderate this important discussion. I'm Crystal Haynes from Boston 25 News, where I've been for about 10 years. I call Arlington home here, where my husband's family has been here for 4 generations. And so I understand the town and the unique complexities of it. And of course, the activism that I've been so impressed by over the years that I have lived here. And so I'm excited to moderate this discussion and continue the conversation over democracy. So I want to jump right in, and as Stephanie mentioned, I do want to ask that first question to our two panelists, Wilnelia and Leslie. Why do you think that there's a need to elect a Democratic governor?
Okay, I can.
Yeah, Leslie, jump right in.
All right,
See, Leslie's my brother from Springfield, so not an actual brother, but my brother in spirit. So we're both from Springfield, Massachusetts.
Well, I'll make sure to channel my Lawrence spirit. So
there you go.
So first, I just want to say I'm really honored and excited to be here tonight. And so jumping right in, so why do we need to elect a Democratic governor? And I'll just start with a couple things, and I'll chime in again. But really, we need somebody who's going to advocate for the people who've been left behind and working on behalf of the people like here in Massachusetts, and not specific groups or just specific folks. And I approach this from, and I don't want to speak too long, but I approach this from my personal connection with education. So everything that's been going on, with the pandemic and how we return to school and the frustrations around that and things that are coming down from DESE, and the way I've been trying to connect my colleagues who vote to the connections, I was okay, so our commissioner was appointed by our Republican governor, right? And our governor has his interests and has his viewpoints. I'm so these things they trickle, so it matters who's in that corner office. I'm so if you want to continue to see things like this happen, or don't want to see things like this continue to happen, then you have to make sure you show up and vote for the Democrat in 2022. Obviously, there's a lot more in that conversation, but that's the way that I like try to like tell folks like about it who aren't in like politics. And that's one of the many reasons to say we need to elect a Democratic governor. So I come at it from an education standpoint first.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everybody for all the work and pulling this together. I know how much it takes, and for everybody making the time to spend to talk about this, right? Because it's important to talk about this early. So why is it important to elect a Democratic governor? Because the truth is that we've fallen asleep on the wheel in Massachusetts in terms of what does it mean to have bold change when it comes to equity, democracy, or even revenue. When we talk about that in the terms of Massachusetts, I think for the last decade, we've fallen into the temptation and the reality of the national, emergency that's happened electorally over the course of the last several years. But during that time, Governor Baker and conservative Democrats have effectively consolidated their power in Beacon Hill. And what that means is that they're doubling down, right? And I think one of the things that's really important about why we need to elect a Democratic governor is that we clearly have a rich tradition in a modern activism in Massachusetts that's very real. Right, we see it all the time. It never stops. Right, but why? And we need to give activists a fight. And the truth is that we haven't had a formidable campaign or challenge to the Republican governors for a long time. And we need a Democratic governor that is going to run on a mantle to change business as usual in Beacon Hill. Because the truth is that the incumbency power of Beacon Hill makes it so that we love to see progress, but we don't like to vote for change. And that's why we need a Democratic governor that's really going to both activate us as Democrats, but most importantly, help attract the likely Democratic voters, because that's the thing about Massachusetts. You don't get to become governor of Massachusetts without having unenrolled voters vote for you. And that's actually what you need to win in the general. And, we'll talk more about that today, but I do want to say how important it is to also have a strong candidate at the top of the ticket that really has a ripple effect, up and down the ballot. And we need a Democratic governor and a Democratic candidates and field that's really going to activate our base across ideology, right? So that we can really make a run for it in 22. So I'll stop there to kind of get us going. And one thing I'll share too, in terms of just kind of how I come at this work, is that when I started as a union organizer, 2 decades ago, and I was organizing in Chicago, even though I grew up here in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and went to school in Medford, right on the other side of Arlington. I came because of Deval Patrick. I was working as a union organizer, knocking on doors, and I heard that this amazing man was running for office. And I was like, shoot, I'm coming back home and I'm going to work at an organization. I ended up working for Neighbor to Neighbor Massachusetts for 7 years. And it's my political home. And it's really what I've dedicated myself for the last 20 years. And the reality is it's been a long time coming, and we need our fight. And it starts with a Democratic governor.
I'm also interested in that piece, the progress versus change piece that we see in Massachusetts that you mentioned, Wilnelia. Mm-hmm. I'd like you to expand a little bit about that and say more. And Leslie, I'd like you to jump in on that too as well.
Yeah. So, and there's so many different issues that, I can highlight about, what do I mean by that in terms of, the progress versus change, right? So, a few years ago, we see that the legislature adopts a Student Opportunity Act to invest, deeper into our public schools, especially our low income, districts across the state. And what do we see happen in the pandemic? The money disappears. And now no one's talking about it anymore. So we made progress, but there wasn't change. Right. And that happens too often. Another example, vote by mail, right? Huge success, historic turnout across the board in the state. But yet the Beacon Hill, again, is having a debate around cost and limiting the access to vote by mail. So again, we like progress, but we don't want change, right? And I think the last point I'll say on that is incumbency. Right, the incumbency power in Massachusetts is one of the deepest that we have in the country, and that incumbency power also makes it much harder to get the kind of bold change that we want, because the kinds of relationships and the kind of culture that Beacon Hill has created over the last few decades is one where risk taking is admonished and penalized. So even when we elect good progressives, we often then see them be taken literally to the basement. And anyone that's related to everyone that knows Beacon Hill knows what that means, right? Are you on the third floor or are you on the bottom floor? Right. So those are some of the examples of what I mean in terms of progress versus change.
I mean, I completely agree. And without saying a lot of what Wilnelia said, it's the same thing. The fact that we have the joke that things go to Beacon Hill to die, or things go to Massachusetts Senate to die. So we have these great ideas. And especially when it comes to, let's say, as Democrats, as the Democratic Party, as our platform, like, right? And when we start to actually see those, we have one of the most progressive platforms that we've ever had before, and it needs to be updated. It's going to be updated, but we haven't seen that actually actioned in our legislation, right? Even though we have Democratic supermajority. And as we said, that we see those ideas get introduced, or certain legislators bring those up, and then what ends up happening, it gets into committee, it goes to dies, and then those legislators we don't hear from. But we love to talk the talk. For me, being the president of YDMA, and also like so being active in America, everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, you live in Massachusetts, like, you know, such a progressive state, great state." And I literally look and I'm like, no, like it's like we have like that false like hope here. We like to talk the talk, we don't walk the walk, and we really have to do that if we want to. We have to do that for our people too if we want to see a Democrat in office, because to those folks, especially folks that are unenrolled, they're not like, they're just like, okay, I'm seeing that our legislators Democratic control, but I'm not seeing anything help me that Democrats are talking about. So then why am I going to go at the top of the ticket if I don't see this stuff changing and the body that actually makes the laws?
What are some of the pieces of that in terms of the hesitancy for these unenrolled voters to make a decision?
Well, I mean, I think part of it, you know, it's an important distinction of sort of voter behavior in Massachusetts, right? And it's important that we don't make sort of larger implications of what it means for other states, because it's very much a kind of Massachusetts reality. Maybe Maryland might be close to us in this way, but the reality is that the Massachusetts electorate, and when I say that, I mean sort of likely voters, right? You know, not you know, sort of when we're trying to bring people into the process. You know, they vote much more liberally when it comes to federal elections than they do for statewide elections. You know, Leslie made the point of how they're not going all the way up to the top of the ticket, but they do for federal elections, but they aren't doing the same for statewide. So in 2020, they're pulling the lever for Markey or Kennedy, right, in a primary, but in 2022, they're likely to vote for Baker, right? And that's what they did in 2018, right? So that's actually part of the dynamics of what we have. And it's actually a challenge, but also a reality of what it takes for a Democrat to win in Massachusetts and become governor, because you actually, the road to become governor means organizing unenrolleds, organizing those that aren't on the rolls yet, right? And Democratic voters, and having to do that all at the same time. So you could just imagine the cost point on that. The Republicans don't have that problem, right? So just to add more context to that, and it's why it almost feels elusive sometimes of sort of why does it take so much to get a Democratic governor? You know, in 47 years, we've only had a Democratic governor 5 times, and it's only 2 names: Michael Dukakis and Deval Patrick. That's crazy to even think about it. So.
When we talked about this before, and I made the joke, and not like to age anybody, or age myself, I said there's only been one Democratic governor in Massachusetts since I've been alive, and it's been Deval Patrick, because Dukakis was governor right before I was born.
Same.
So
same.
I'm like, but we're the super Democratic state, so that lets me know that we have an issue. Actually, I want to touch another thing you said. We talked about like for federal elections, they're pulling that lever, like for Democrats, but in state elections, they're not. When I was canvassing for a Senate candidate in 2018, I had folks saying, yeah, I'm going to vote for them, but I'm going to vote for Baker for governor. And I was just like, this is polar opposites of like the person you're talking about. So I don't, and that showed me right then and there. And that's why actually I chose to really start getting involved in Democratic like politics specifically, because I'm like, there's a disconnect. Like if a person can say, I'm going to vote for Elizabeth Warren, I'm also going to vote for Charlie Baker. Like there is like, we're doing something wrong as Democrats, like in organizing, like in our state, like if that's the case, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Obviously, I think when it comes to more specifically unenrolled voters, most of the folks I know are unenrolled. They tend to vote Democratic, but like they're unenrolled, and they give me the whole thing about I don't want to be associated with a certain party and all this stuff. It's like, but it really comes down to, and they're like, while living here in Massachusetts, they're like, I don't see the point in me actually like checking out the box and becoming a Democrat, because like, what is it? Like, it's not really doing anything like for me. Like, I don't see like that actually like happening like directly like on the local level. And I'm speaking like specifically to like the local level, like here in Springfield, because that's where I have done like majority of my organizing and like have grown up. So I'm speaking specifically to Springfield when I say that. So I have been thinking, and when we think about for 2022, it's how am I going to connect those democratic values to folks here and them actually see this is why we need this governor here, and this is what they're going to do, and this is what the Democratic Party, I can say what it stands for, but actually we have to show up and actually do what we say we're going to do. Otherwise, we're letting folks down. And then they're going to go back in 4 years and say, you know what, I will vote for this other person.
How does the party address those disconnects?
It goes to a weekly meeting about this. So let me take it first for you, Leslie, to give you some space so we can alternate. So to self-disclose, because I also to answer your question, which I think people always find very interesting about me, is that I am a dedicated, unenrolled Democratic strategist. I've actually been an unenrolled voter since I've voted in Massachusetts, right? And the reality is that I'm more representative than the majority of the electorate than a progressive when it comes to those that likely vote. So I just want to be clear, right? Just kind of keep those lanes in the container, and you know, I will not go into the reasons for that because that's less important. But when it comes to strategy and when it comes to the party, you know, the work that I've also done nationally is where it really informs this lens. And sort of my response to this is that the truth is that we need to invest in the party. The party has not been invested in a way for it to hold the culture that we want from it, right? So we can become more inclusive, you can have a more progressive agenda, but if it doesn't have the infrastructure or the staffing or the capacity to really build out this work and have the infrastructure to hold it once elections are over, then it's not possible. And obviously, and I think part of the challenge too, that I think it's important for all of us to be cognizant in this space is that, you know, one of the realities in Massachusetts is that a lot of, we fund a lot of national elections, but we don't do the same when it comes to Democratic races in Massachusetts. And the governor's race in particular is one of those places. And it's actually also one of the reasons why I know the party is trying to raise money for whomever the Democratic governor will be, in come 2022, which I think is important. But what does it mean to really have more people put skin in that game, right? To actually build that infrastructure for the long term and not just waiting for elections, right? And most importantly, trying to find the strategic opportunities within the movement actors in the state that, usually are more left of where the party is, right? But we're still working together. It's Massachusetts, we're that small. We're not that big, right? As someone that's actually worked statewide, and the reality is that our politics is deeply relational. The same way that a Baker Democrat will pull the lever for Baker, he'll also pull the lever for Kennedy, right? Or for Markey, right? So I think those things are important to know because people will shift over time, but it has to be a more relational approach in Massachusetts. It's not just about the policy contrast, because sometimes there isn't any. And what happens then when we're not going up against the Republican governor yet, right? So I think that, just to bring textures of like what the party could be doing more, and also bringing in folks, strategists and others and, across the state that could help be a part of that process, but not necessarily be part of the table of building it every day. Because at the end of the day, I'm not naive. There's still some degree of a competition in all of this. But if we don't have a space for collaboration, and the party needs to be the place to be able to host that over in the future, for us to really be able to do this in a way that's more sustainable. And I think that, the governor's race is the best way to start.
So I'm in trouble. It's okay. So when we talk about investing in party, I'm just gonna speak, and I'm just gonna speak. We have to have a welcoming party first, like in order to invest in it.
I couldn't agree more.
Completely honest. Right. So I have the honor of being on the state committee. I have the honor of being the co-chair of these services. And never have I been in this space that makes me feel so comfortable sometimes, just because of how undiverse it is, like when it comes to age, like, and background, like, and it's like you're in the space and you want to speak up, but also, like, I know for me, I don't like my voice to be tokenized either, because I can't speak like everybody. But what I can say is that we have to work on being like more inclusive. And with that, That's how you also get folks to invest in it. There are a lot of folks that would rather just say, oh, I'm going to support a candidate directly, or I'm just going to support like a campaign directly or support this cause directly, because they're like they're like, what, they don't see the party like really doing too much. And that's like a whole, like, I'm not going to get into like what the party, like I can get into what the party should and shouldn't be doing, but really it comes down to like being welcoming, like first, in my opinion. Like it has to be like a welcoming space. Otherwise, people are not going to want to support it. There are plenty of times, like even now, like where I'm looking and I'm like, okay, I see this older generation from my side of the state that's very active in the state party. I'm like, so where is the disconnect? And I found out they're like, oh, like they did it, and I try to get into that space, and I'm like, no, absolutely not. So I decided that I would just support the candidates to the campaigns directly. I'm like, so I see that there. I'm like, but knowing that, it's like, how are we going to work to change that? Because just because we have certain things listed in the platform, we say we're for this, doesn't mean that we're actually like being that party that is actually showing up for that. Going back to say like other organizations too that work on the left side. I know you mentioned being a part of Neighbor to Neighbor for many years, because I actually had to call you earlier about Neighbor to Neighbor. I am on the board of Neighbor to Neighbor, like, right? And that is my political home as well. That's my organizing home. And knowing in that organization, there's so many folks that are just about the movement and about like getting the work done, like and showing up for the new majority. And while those things like align with the Democratic Party, they're just like, hey, I just want to do the work. And so we have to be better at working with organizations like that are out here, that have the infrastructure, that are doing that, and just saying, hey, we have a common goal. Like, you want to see a person doing this, we want the person from our party there aligned with that. Let's get it done. But until we do that and actually welcome those folks in, not just use them for an election and then throw them away, then we're not going to be able to get anywhere.
Well, what role do you think the 2021 municipal elections will play in terms of affecting electing a Democratic governor? And either of you can answer this question.
Mm-hmm. And there's a different, what I would say, there's a couple of different ways of answering this question, but I think the important thing is sort of looking at the patterns here, right? And the reality is that, historically what's happened in our election landscape is that we tend to overly focus and invest, both our time and our money and our attention in Suffolk County and Middlesex. Right, and those and within sort of that power sphere, right? So to think about this at a county level, it's probably just helpful from a geography perspective. So not to get into the congressional lines and other things like that. And that's an important marker of where we still need to grow. There's a reason why local government is so much more conservative than our federal delegation, right? Again, people are voting distinctly different, right? Based on sort of what the cycle is, right? Especially likely Democratic voters, right? So, and I think that's part of the opportunity with municipal elections all the time, right? We got to look at every year of every cycle as an opportunity to prime that pump, right? But how are we actually deepening investments? And it doesn't mean that we say, check, Boston's done, but it took 20 years of organized and coordinated work to do the transformation of political representation that's happened in the city of Boston and at a municipal level. There's still a lot of work to be done, but if anybody would have, talked to anyone that knows about politics a year ago, that no cisgendered white man would be running for city of Boston and mayor's race, I don't think very few people would have predicted that. Right. And that takes long-term investments, right? Like, and when we think about the national landscape, right? Georgia, Arizona, hopefully North Carolina in the future, right? Those things take long-term investments. And we know where those places are in Massachusetts. It's in Springfield, it's in Lawrence, it's in Lowell, right? It's in Holyoke, right? We know where those places are, and we need to be able to invest and go deep there and not just go when we need them for elections. And that's the challenge. We go 6 weeks, 8 weeks before election day, and then we think that that's going to make the investment. Not when trust is broken, right? I know Governor Patrick was here, in the last session, and it's something that I learned from working for him, but also has become a core practice of my work when I talk about deep democracy. The truth is that when you don't believe that government's going to do anything for you, and it practically also is your lived experience, you can give me all the contrast and all the great policy that you need, but it's not going to make me want to care. And what we've seen in Massachusetts is that when you bring together movement and bold candidates and you make these investments is when you then have these exceptions. It's when you have an Ayanna Pressley. It's when you have a Deval Patrick. But we can't be investing for exceptions. If we want a Democratic governor, we have to be able to do the work. And if for some reason, and I will knock on wood, and this is wood, we may fall short in 22, even if we make progress in these municipals, in these areas of growth, right, year round, it means that it prepares us for the next one. And actually, and we keep our eye on the ball, and not just sort of say, okay, well, we got defeated. And as someone that is also, sort of intersecting and working on the governor's race as well. I think what's hard from the big picture is that a lot of people find that Baker's incumbency is so powerful that they're kind of deflated a little bit. He's rising even more politically stronger than he ever has out of this recovery, even though the inequities that we know that COVID has shown us all have all become worse. So something just for also to munch on there, because I know there's a lot, but I think it's just an important piece of like not just thinking about this year's municipals, but like how we think about them every single year. So
for me, thinking about what role the 2021 municipal elections play, I'm going to be a little disclosure. I'm also a candidate in for municipal elections too. But really just thinking about, and what I've noticed in being active across the state is how little we do invest in municipal elections, especially in Western Mass, and speaking over in Springfield. The fact that the same folks continue to run, and then there might be a new person here or there that do run. So everybody's just kind of oh, well, we've already had all this. So you're coming here new, are you as ages, are you experienced as they are? But getting stuck in that same mindset. So I see folks they do that on a municipal level because they get so comfortable. So then they kind of, that behavior translates to statewide elections, at least. I'm going to speak specifically to where I live. I'll speak specifically to where I live. And so for me, and hopefully seeing transformative municipal elections in the sense of saying specifically in Springfield, and seeing that there are more candidates actually that are speaking out, that are challenging status quo, and that are also being innovative and being more like the Ayanna Pressley, the Deval Patricks, and not doing what a traditional politician is, and seeing people get energized, using that energy and capitalizing on that energy next year in 2022. I would say my personal goal, obviously running for office, was to get elected so I can step up for Springfield, but also it was, I live in a ward that has one of the lowest voter turnout in the city. So it was to get people out to vote. I was I want to get people out, I want to get people energized. And me thinking with the political hat on, I'm I want folks energized so that way they're keeping this energy now, and then they're going to have the energy next year. They can keep it the year after that for a mayoral race. It's thinking down the line. And I believe that we need more candidates that think like that too. I want to win, but I want to get folks out to win. Not that I just want to win with 400 votes out of 12,000 registered voters out of 18,000 people live in a certain neighborhood. That's not going to get people out. That's not going to get the change that we need. And then so you can't work against that. And then I feel call yourself a Democrat that wants to see change. It's not going to work. So all in all, I believe we really have to capitalize off this energy, build the energy, and then capitalize off that and keep going with that momentum, which means that after the election, we are still engaging people and we're setting them up, and we are keeping that going, not just saying, oh, well, my race is done. What I need to do is done. So I don't have to pay attention for another 2 years. We got to keep going. And that starts directly on the local level.
And I do want to go ahead and move towards the Q&A because we are getting a lot of questions coming in. And then one question that was sent is, and I'm quoting this person, doesn't come from me, but it says, did DeLeo's seeming infatuation with Baker and his refusal to politically attack him help Baker stay in office? I don't know who wants to take that question.
Yeah, I can take it. I think what the question is alluding to is an important point, which is the actual practical collaboration sometimes between, the former speakers sort of kind of, leadership block, former Speaker DeLeo, right, and Baker. As a matter of fact, Governor Baker and conservative Democrats on Beacon Hill actually made cross endorsements last year in 2020. And all those incumbents won their re-elections. Some of them were being primaried from the left, actually. The Molly Legal and Dan Ryan's race in Chelsea/Charlestown in the greater Boston area is an example of that. And that they effectively consolidated themselves even further, right? And it's why, DeLeo was able to leave and march out at the dark of the night and is at Northeastern nice and calmly and installed Mariano, and is someone who has been around for almost 2 decades in the Beacon Hill ecosystem. I've known Mariano was going to be the next speaker since I've been in 25. So, and then that's been the most open secret on Beacon Hill for almost 15 years, right? So it's just almost, it's a theater. It's a theater, and they have it pretty well tuned, and it's why this call to action around local and statewide, the statewide gubernatorial election is so critical, because the reality is that as Democrats, right, we need to be able to talk both about Beacon Hill and Baker. We've got to bring them together. It's the culture of both that's actually the challenge, right? And it goes back to this piece around progress but not change, because going back to the example I shared earlier around the Student Opportunity Act, the legislature could do something different and more bold to hold Baker accountable. In the meantime, crickets. So whether it's Baker, whether it's DeLeo or it's Mariano who's in the position now, it's still the same, right? They're still setting their plays and they're putting their messengers, and everyone knows what their part is. And from my perspective as a strategist, we have to do the same. And what's the playbook, right? And what does that mean for us, whether we're on the Democratic side or on the unenrolled side, because we actually need each other to move this.
And then Leslie, I'm going to have you answer this question. How do we change the perception that electing a Republican governor balances the legislature?
Can we change that perception? So I know I've heard that before.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of I'm curious to actually find out too, how many, I've heard it a couple of times. I'm curious to see how many people actually think that, think that, and think that it's truly balance. Because I know sometimes folks, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find my words.
That's okay. That means that's what happens when you have listener questions, they're going to ask you something you may not have prepared for.
I'm trying to find my words with this, but I don't think it's a lot of folks that really go and really say that I want to balance out my states. I'm gonna have a Republican for the Democratic legislature. I know that like I said, I've heard that before, but I don't think that that's that many folks. But how do we change that perception? I mean, just looking at the way I would explain to somebody is looking at how we are now. Has this balance truly worked out with this Democratic legislature and this Republican governor? And really, we just have a whole bunch of conservatives and leadership and people who are stopping stuff from happening anyway. So there really isn't a balance, because really they're just really helping the governor. So there is no balance there. If you really want to talk about balance, I could see if we had some super, quote unquote, radical progressive legislature, and then had a Republican governor, and that would be balanced. But we don't have that. We haven't had that. So I personally don't see how the two balance. And so I don't want to be dismissive of that question or of that viewpoint. I just I guess the way I would just reference that, how are the two really balancing each other, other than a name, Republican and Democrat.
Yeah. Cornelia, did you have anything you wanted to add there on that?
I mean, I think, it's about breaking the myth. I think there's a lot of things that, depending on what your social sphere of who you talk to, maybe that's what people around you all say. But the reality is that when you run political campaigns and as a strategist, the truth is that, people will say the same about, not voting for a Democrat because of the Massachusetts narrative, right? Democratic governor's going to come in and just raise a bunch of taxes, right? So like there's a couple different things that always kind of come up, and it's always pretty consistent. And what we can't do is run away from it. We gotta pull the receipts and demonstrate, what it actually means, right? What does it actually mean to have this form of Beacon Hill and this governor, and what are the receipts that we can demonstrate, right? And what are the contrast points that we can show, right? Like what was accomplished in our last Democratic, when we had a Democratic governor, and what did we do, and what were the lasting impacts of that, and what does it mean to actually have the opportunity to do that again? Right? Because we're not going deep and we're not going as transformative as we want. And I want to go to one of the comments that folks made here on the thread, because I think it's an important part to this question too, around perception and how do you deal with it. Is the truth of the matter is that we do have a moderate electorate in Massachusetts. I sometimes have to repeat this to my team constantly, and they look at me and they're like, "Oh, I know you're right." They look at me like, and I'm like, my heart's with you guys. But the reality is that if we want to get there, we got to do the long-term investments. We got to identify the voters. We got to build the voter file. We got to put the infrastructure around it. We got to run the creative, innovative campaigns where people are going to want to feel that they want to be a part of something. Right. And I think that's the reality, like the lack of imagination right now sometimes that we have when we're running statewide, especially for governor. Right. And the reality is that to run statewide means that you got to run through 351 cities and cobble together all that chattering class that exists in 351, because that's how we roll here. That's who we are. You can complain about it. You can say whatever you want, but that's who we are. And we have to be willing to do that part of the work. And we haven't been able to fund something so robust that really allows us to go deep to find those voters and stay with them. Right. And I think that that's the other part of it, too, that technology for campaigns have changed. There's a reason why nobody but us on Ayanna's campaign thought that we could win. We had our own data. We would talk about it and they would look at us like, all right, whatever, right? Like, okay, it sounds smart, Winelia, right? And then AOC wins and all of a sudden like, oh, is that what you were saying? It's like, yeah, that's what we're saying. Right. So again, but what does it mean to not just change the electorate over the course of just a cycle, but doing it consistently and spending time on this message and building an electorate that does want to be in coalition with one another, right? Because I think that that's the reality, that people will always default to what's been the usual here, right? And I know plenty of people that vote Democratic locally can't even tell you who their state rep is.
So here's so we have another question. How can Democratic activists work in meaningful and inclusive ways across the country and municipal and district lines, particularly in communities of color, in a way that centers the experiences, perspectives, and needs of those communities? What does being an ally mean? And what are some of the steps that should be taken by those who want to be engaged in this way? So it's a long question, but I think that the overall meaning is like, how do we make sure that we think about inclusivity as part of our campaigns to attract more Democratic voters, and what roles do allies play in that? Leslie, if you want to go first.
I will. I'm reading the question too.
Yeah, you're reading the question. Okay, you got it. Yeah.
So the first part of that, when we say like working in meaning and inclusive ways across the county, municipal, and district lines, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier about making sure that we're building an inclusive party. And making sure that we're truly trying to bring folks in continuously, and their voices are heard, and they're actually having a seat at the table, not just because there is a race to win. Like, we got to build the folks up before that, and continue after that. Going back to what I said earlier about relational organizing, and how that's going to take a lot of relational organizing across the state. in order to get folks there. And that is something that people are now, I guess, like learning and realizing and trying to do, but it's a long-term thing, it's not a short-term thing. The other like part of that, and I'll touch on the particularly in communities of color. I want to say we don't necessarily have Democratic activists. Like in my community, we have activists who happen to like align with Democrats. And so it wasn't, and specifically like for my generation, it wasn't until like me and a couple others like really like, starting to get involved in like this like statewide like Democratic stuff. Folks saying, "Oh, okay, like I might want to join that and maybe be a part of that," and not there just be like one or two or three folks like from the community over here, but have like multiple folks. But we get tokenized. Like we get tokenized by the Democratic Party on like say national level, and people like are skeptical of that, and so like on the state level they're just kind of like no, like I don't like need, like I'm not going to be a part of something that, like I said, like it's just going to show up like when it's convenient and then like not actually like affect change. So kind of back into what a lot of things are said, like until we actually hold our Democrats accountable and they start showing up like with these policy changes and doing things to do in the state legislature, in this democratically controlled state legislature, and calling out things and doing that, then we're not going to be able to get that many folks like and truly like be able like to bring in these communities who will benefit from these policies, because they're saying, okay, you want my vote, you want me to organize on your behalf, but how are you going to show up for me? And I will even like hold my personal elected officials like to the fire, like in Springfield, like right, who have a delegation of majority people of color, like who also like don't like even show up from our community sometimes too. I like said it, and I have no problem like calling it out and talk about, oh, that's not good. Like politics is not, like being Tea Party Democrat. I could criticize you and like still support you, but you have to be criticized because you're not perfect all the time. But until we actually start getting it right, like on a small scale, we're not going to be able to bring these people in, right? That is why when going out to canvass for even Adam Gomez's Senate election and being in places where folks haven't seen a canvass for like in years, and they're like, I have never had nobody knock on my door. Like, what are you like doing here, right? Like it shouldn't be that. It's like, but like, right, no other Democrat that's run before has come and knocked on your door, right? So that also like highlights the problem.
Yeah. What I would just say, just to kind of build off of what you shared, and is that we have to be willing to do this work at home. We have to be uncomfortable with each other here. You mentioned earlier, Leslie, around sort of having like being more welcoming, but part of being more welcoming is going through a journey that we have to accept that part of that journey means also facing sometimes our own personal discomforts and our collective discomforts. As someone that truly, often feels like a shapeshifter in this work because of the different sort of spaces that I'm moving across, right? That's the life I've lived. It's the reality, right? And the reality is that when so many of us choose not to practice that discomfort is when things stay the same, right? And, and around this question in terms of the national cycles, the truth is that historically and probably for many years to come, Massachusetts will always be a critical activist and donor community to the national playbook. It's who we are. It's our tradition. But what does it mean to be bold at home? And it means that we actually got to do some of our uncomfortable work here, right? And our building work and our trust building work as well. And I say that because I don't want to be naive, nor do I want to just, tie myself to like nice data points, because it's really easy to just kind of like, point to a few and just kind of hammer them over and over again. But to get to this relational piece and this ally building piece, right? It means that, right? And sometimes that uncomfortable, dealing with the discomfort means sometimes having spaces that are mixed, and sometimes and by mixed I mean, multiracial. I mean, it also means having spaces within our own to figure out some of the stuff that we have to figure out, right? You know, Leslie, you made the example of Springfield and holding up, you know, other legislators of color accountable. That's the reality too, right? You know, and I think that, you know, and another important point is that we have to be willing to put skin in that game. You know, as someone right now, the reason I'm here, you know, this evening, and I'm going to continue to be doing more of this across the state, is that I finally got tired of all the national work I've been doing for the last 7 years. You know, the truth is that I walked away from Massachusetts politics when I left Neighbor to Neighbor. And I did because I was burnt out and I was tired. And I wanted to build myself and my own political power. Because the truth is that I would have never found the job that I have now in building my own firm.
That's powerful. Well, right. I know we're hitting here at we're hitting up against 8:06, and I want to make sure that we have room to go to these breakout rooms, because it seems like folks are fired up, ready to go, want to have some more in-depth conversations about that. But I just want to say thank you so much, Winelia and Leslie, for being part of this conversation with me. And I'm going to send it over to Stephanie. Thank you all so much. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Crystal. Thanks, Winelia. Thanks, Leslie. We really cannot express our appreciation enough for being here tonight and giving us your insights and being a part of this conversation. I think, you know, after listening to you guys, it's really apparent that there's a lot at stake and at risk, frankly, in our democracy, both now and in the future, 2022 and beyond. And a big part of the work we need to do that I heard loud and clear is really to look inward as individuals, as a party, really in order to get where we need to go in 2022. So thank you guys for really bringing that to the forefront. It's powerful and it is well received. I'd now like to introduce, right before we do our breakout rooms, Marlene Silva, who is an ADTC member, state committee member, and also an activist and organizer extraordinaire. She's going to tell us just a little bit about the Mass Democratic Party's blueprint to 22, since we're talking about the governor's race, and what the party is contemplating for Democrats to do to elect a Dem governor now, specifically in 2021, and then moving forward. So Marlene, please take it away.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers. That was phenomenal. And thank you for hosting these critically important conversations. And I would like to say welcome to anyone who would like to join the volunteer space. Blueprint for 2222 is a foundational campaign organized by the Mass Dems, and it's so we can win back the governor's seat and win up and down the ballot. It's relational, it's grassroots. I want to welcome everyone to participate. And the premise is to give volunteers skills and actions to carry them through to 2022 and beyond. There's a lot that I can say, but I've learned through all of the volunteer work that we have done that, as Ayanna says, hope is work. And I hope that you can join us for Blueprint to 22. And I'm going to drop some links in the chat. We're going to enjoy talking to our neighbors and our friends, and we're going to have an Arlington Blueprint for 22 meeting on June 21st, and the Mass Democratic State Party will have one on June 16th. So here we go. And once again, thank you so much. Blueprint to 22. I welcome everyone to join, and thank you for your past volunteer actions and what I know we can do in the future.
Great, thanks, Marlene. Okay, as we move into the next phase of our event, as Crystal mentioned, our goal is now to really equip and connect everyone with resources and organizations that are currently engaged in grassroots organizing. You know, there's something really for everyone here. And as you will see in the breakout rooms, I think there's a lot of really good information, a lot of good work being done. So we'll all be going into the breakout rooms. They will be randomly assigned. Each room will have a facilitator. We will allow our participants to ask questions, speak, use the chat, make sure you introduce yourself, where you're from, And really, the goal is to have a direct discussion about the questions that we just heard our panelists answer. And additionally, one other question: what are some new and imaginative ways that Democrats can organize to ensure that we will elect a Democratic governor in 2022? So again, each facilitator will give us a little bit about what they do, what organizations they're a part of, and how you can get involved. And feel free to have these conversations freely, ask questions, and we will, at 8:25, right around, we'll bring you back to the main room of the forum. The breakout room hosts and facilitators will briefly summarize what was discussed in terms of action steps and otherwise. And then after that, we'll have some informal networking. But finally, before we send you on your way, I just want to give a big shout out to our 5 facilitators: Miriam Siegel from Act on Mass, Alex Bausch from the Organizing Hub, Betsy Chase from Mass Call to Action, Martha Carcheri, I apologize if I mispronounced your name, Martha, from ORMA, she's our co-chair, and Caitlin Castillo, who's a field organizer for Andrea Campbell, and an avid student activist. So here we go. You will be randomly assigned. If you prefer not to be in the breakout room, feel free to just come back to the main room, and there will be people here to chat with. So let's do this. Host, please send our panelists, or send our members of the breakout room.